Welcome to the Follow the Leaders podcast, where we get a glimpse into the minds and lives of exceptional leaders and hear about their experiences, insights, and strategies for success. On today's episode, we'll hear from one heart-centered, effective leader and hear about their wisdom and perspective. So get ready to follow along. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited for this conversation today. It just touches on so many of my interests and my nerdy tendencies and things that I've loved to learn about over the years. And so I'm really excited to introduce you all to my guests today. I think that you are going to really love learning from them, as I have loved learning about them behind the scenes. I'm so excited to talk with them. I am joined today by Adele Gambardella and Chip Massey, who are two accomplished professionals with diverse backgrounds and a shared mission. Adele is recognized as a prominent figure in the public relations world, bringing over 20 years of expertise and serving as a spokesperson for Fortune 100 companies and teaching at prestigious universities. And Chip is a former FBI special agent who offers a wealth of experience in high-stakes criminal cases and negotiation techniques. And together, they are co-founders of The Convincing Company, where they bridge the worlds of PR and crisis negotiation, providing global consulting and training services to a wide range of clients, from tech startups to Fortune 500 giants. And now our listeners, I'm so excited to talk with you both. Congrats on all of your impact and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you for having us.
Well, I am so excited to learn about you. Could you please both just start by telling me more about your company as a whole? And then I'd love to learn a little bit more about each of you individually, your areas of expertise within the work that you're doing, and what a picture of your work life looks like.
The goal of our company is to help people get into the news and help people get out of the news, help people get the spotlight and hide when necessary, right? In just dealing with a lot of crisis communication issues. We also do a lot of training on how to be effective convincers. What we like to say is I convince to save people's reputation and Chip convince to save people's lives. And so together, it's a really smart skill set that can be used in a variety of business situations, including high stakes, high pressure communication situations and leadership decision making and so on. So that's a quick overview of what the Convincing Company does.
Awesome. And I'd love to learn a bit about each of you. Adele, why don't you share first, and then we'd love to hear from Chip.
Sure. So I started my career as a journalist working for John F. Kennedy Jr.'s publication, George Magazine, which was a very cool way to start my career. And I have to say, I think that particular career move really influenced so many other things that I did after that. Forever, every time I walked into an interview, they were like, so did you know John F. Kennedy Jr.? And I was like, it was never not a part of the conversation, right? And I think that prestige, I sort of took some of his prestige and absorbed it, thankfully. And from that job, I went on to be a newspaper reporter, kind of an investigative journalist, for about 6 years. And then I needed to pay back my student loans. And I went over to the dark side, Madison Avenue. It was all during the .com boom. So they needed publicists, especially people who had a journalism background. So I came in with a specialty of here's how things could go wrong. Here's how the media could report wrongly about your brand. And so the specialization in crisis communication sort of grew from there. And then I started my own agency about 16 years ago. Just got sick of reporting to someone else and decided that I was going to start my own business. And then Chip and I met about 5 years ago and we started a new company. So yeah, it's been a fun career journey.
All right, Chip, and tell us about you.
Right. So I started my career in the FBI, the Washington Field Office. And over there, I was responsible for working on espionage squads, doing some counterintelligence work, national security, also drug violations, fugitive arrests, that kind of thing. And I transferred from there to the New York field office, where I led the hostage negotiation team for the New York City field office there. So really, when I met Adele, it was, hey, our skill set's kind of complementary. I think there's some room here that we could, do something. And so we started talking about the techniques I would use as an agent and as a hostage negotiator. And then it was all about, okay, well, Adele was asking me, so how did you do this? How did you do that? What was the learning, the principles behind that? And she has a strong business mind, such a strong business mind that she was able to see where we could use that as a template going forward for businesses, that this was something that would be very useful for businesses, CEOs, teams to learn about this kind of skill set. So yeah, that's how we got together, and that's what we're doing now.
Well, I love to hear about that because for my work, I lead a bunch of different projects. And the first thing that I think when I have a new idea or that something comes to be is who could I work with on this if it's not already obvious? And so I love the collaboration mindset of like merging skills. We are just like better together. So I love to hear it. That's really interesting. So your company is called The Convincing Company. And I'm curious, what are the types of things that The Convincing Company is doing right now?
Yeah. So, we work with a lot of CEOs in high pressure situations where they have to answer pretty difficult questions, sometimes related to media inquiries, sometimes related to staff problems, sometimes related to perception issues. And so we guide these CEOs and people who are leaders in organizations through these very difficult situations. And, what's interesting, Jamie, is before I met Chip, I ran a crisis communication agency on my own. I had a team, and I always felt like I was guiding people through these crises, and it worked, and people listened sometimes, right? Like it was like a 70-30 rule, right? And it's like, I really need people to listen. Why aren't they listening to me? And you can see when you're a crisis expert, you're seeing something unfold, and you're like, if they don't listen to you at any point or any step of the way, it can just be like, they could just blow the whole thing, right? And so one of the things that I just think Chip brings to the business that is so valuable to any of the clients we have is a skill set I didn't have before I met him, which is this idea of how do you forensically listen to someone? How do you read them in a way that they need to? How do you lead them down a path that is in their best interest? That's what we're doing. We're leading them down a path that's in their best interest. But how do you do that while creating emotional safety, by still having them feel mitigation for mistakes? And I sort of was just like, these are the 5 things that you need to do. Do them now. Don't get caught up in like all the stuff that's bad. Just let's move past that and do these things. And when Chip came on, we started to have a different type of client experience in that, yes, we solved their crisis, but they walked away changed and more emotionally vested in fixing their issue because of his expertise. But I'll let Chip talk about that a little bit more. But it was really just like he took our crisis agency and it became like crisis management on steroids in a good way,
Well, that's really due to Adele's teaching and leading, Jamie. Something I left out was when we started working together, and it was like in August 5 years ago. And Adele said, okay, I think I got it now. What we're going to do is we're going to put on a masterclass. We're going to have it in New York City, and we're going to do it in 3 months. I said, what? So she was already putting things together, seeing how it all worked, right? Jamie, you get it. This is how your mind works as well.
Yeah.
So the idea, what we do when we're dealing with people in crisis, it's the same kind of patterns emerge for leaders. It's, I feel the weight of this. The whole burden of what's happened is on my shoulders. I messed up, and I don't want to be seen as that person. And, I'm just hesitant. And there's a lot of bad behavior that's normal. It is normal human behavior when we're under attack, right? When we feel that our livelihood is in jeopardy. So I'm used to dealing with people in crisis. That was the nature of the game. My normal day was, hey, you need to put the gun down and come out and surrender to me and release your hostages, right? And the thing about it is that it was never a negotiation. I never one time negotiated with anybody. My job was to convince them. I had to convince them to value what I valued, which was safety, which was release those hostages and surrender to me so we all can go home today and be safe. And that took a bit, right? It took a bit from somebody saying, I want $2 million and a jet to, can you get me out of here alive kind of thing, right? So it was never, hey, you got 7 hostages in there, tell you what. You kill 3, give me 4, we'll call it a day, right? Never going to happen. So failure not an option. I had to 100% get it right. And it's the same kind of mentality that these executives go through. So Adele lines up and she knows probably within 10 minutes what the problem is and what the solve is, right? It's true. She's like a genius this way. And what's difficult for these people is that it's doing the actual steps. Some of these steps are hard. Some of these steps require them to say, I messed up. I'm sorry. I take responsibility. And there's other things within that. It's getting them prepared to do that and to follow through on it and to not fall back on, let's just put our head in the sand. This is going to go away. Never going to go away. It's only going to get worse, right? Yep. So that's what we do. We talk about various convincing strategies. And what we say with convincing, Jamie, is that with our forensic listening, the idea in that kind of umbrella concept that we have is that we say that words leave clues. And it's the study, it's the analysis of conversations that you've had in the past and the study and the analysis of those conversations after they've happened. And you can get so much information and you can inform your next moves about dealing with that client, dealing with that leader, dealing with that team as a result of that.
So I love this so much. One, I just find it so interesting personally, but also I think you're totally right that leaders of organizations, maybe it is not a hostage situation, but we do when we are leading an organization, or some of my programs have hundreds of kids there at the same time. And so that raises the stakes in many other ways. Or I have a lot of colleagues who lead nonprofit organizations whose services are necessary for their customers. When something is going wrong, or when there is a high tension, high pressure situation, the leaders who are the ones that are responsible for handling it, we feel it so much in our hearts. We're not cold operators. Yeah. We feel the weight of it. And it can feel like our job becomes putting out fires, handling the problems, because if they are not problems, they probably aren't rising to the level of needing to be handled by the leaders, that if their systems are working in place and everything is going smoothly, the leaders aren't necessarily involved in the day-to-day operations of the little things. And so I really love this approach of the way that you guys are working on this. So are you people working with you on a consultant base? Are you running master classes? I know that you wrote a book I'm excited to talk about. What are the ways that you two serve your customers or the people learning from you?
Yeah, people can work with us in a number of different ways. I mean, we do have crisis consultants. We have clients who've been with us for a while who we walk through different difficult circumstances and then train either their board or them how to handle these situations, how to prepare for them. And actually, I don't mean to say the word prepare, because the thing about a crisis is this: you can't prevent crises. They're going to happen. It's predicting what's going to create the crisis that really is the leader's job. And leaders get that mixed up so much because they're like, it's like, we're putting out fires all over the place. Like, what fire to put out next? And it's like, what they don't realize is crises are usually born from micro crises, meaning that there are a series of little decisions that you make that then lead to a level of distrust that then leads to the crisis. Usually the underlying thing of any crisis situation is distrust, a lack of trust, a loss of trust. And so for leaders to build that trust back up, one of the ways at which we talk about doing that is through small promises and commitments that you make good on over a series of time, so that then people start to trust you again. But as the crisis is happening, that's a difficult thing to do, right? So definitely crisis consulting. We also do masterclasses. We have a masterclass called Training So Good It's Criminal.
Love that.
Yeah, where we go through role plays and a variety of different scenarios where people can actually act as a hostage negotiator with a role player with Chip's guidance, which is super cool, really fun. And we send clues to their phones and they become like a special agent for an afternoon. And it's just really super fun and engaging. And also we're in the developing of online courses based on our book called Convince Me. So those are the 3 ways at which people can work with us.
That's incredible. I will be looking up your next masterclass because I am definitely wanting to participate. Fun. That's really really cool. And I really like what you said, Chip, about that it really isn't about negotiation. It's about convincing. That's really, it was an aha moment, like such a light bulb, because it's true. That is true. It's, of course, there's some moments where you're like, okay, this number, this number, this number, but that's not in a crisis. You're right. You do have to get into the convincing mode. So obviously everybody should read your book and I want to hear more about that, but are there just some little nuggets of things that you could give, knowing that our listenership is leaders of organizations, aspiring leaders, business owners? Are there any like starter nuggets that you could give about being convincing to our listeners in moments that really matter?
Yeah. What we always advocate is this idea of understanding somebody at a deeper level. And what we call our technique with that is the unstated narrative. And the unstated narrative simply is that everyone is going around with thousands of tapes running in their head at any given time about all the experiences that they've had in life. And they've got those tapes running about us, about who we are, what we represent, what our company is, the kind of person that we are portraying ourselves to be, and how they actually really feel about us. Now, that tape is different than what they will actually tell us to our face. You can imagine that there would be all kinds of problems in the world if people actually said, you know how I really feel about you? Okay, right? So we take a step back. We already have a kind of governor in our brain that's like a diplomatic kind of system. And what we teach our executives and teams is that if you can find and get close to that person's unstated narrative, what they really feel, believe, think about you, your company, your product, whatever it is you represent. If you get close to that, not that you're actually going to hit it 100% on the nose, but if you can get close and closer than your competition, which you will using our techniques, then you're going to have a distinct advantage, right? Because you actually know, well, I know what the holdbacks are. I'm close to it at least. And I know where there's reticence and I know where the friction is. So that's where you're going to start to address and make room. And also, it's about understanding who that person is. You know, so oftentimes we're just all about showing up to, vomit what we know and hope that, some of it that they want. What people really want is to be understood, to understand what it is they stand for and who they want to be, not necessarily who they are, but who they want to be. And that can be a powerful motivator at going forward with that relationship.
I love that. I heard recently that there's been a new love language added to the 5 love languages, and that is to be known. And so I think that, when you can show someone like, oh, I saw this and I thought of you, I know you love this. And so I think you're really speaking to people's core needs. I love to hear that. And I was thinking also about, I'm curious if these skills that you are teaching people are also beneficial in working with your staff. Obviously, we're talking about crises here, but on an everyday basis, when you are leading a team of people, getting closer, as you mentioned, to what their real story is, what their real needs are, what their real what did you call it? The unstated narrative. Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
that probably builds relationships. It's not really about winning. I'm sort of absorbing what you're saying right now. It's not about winning the crisis or winning the situation. It's really about building that relationship. Obviously that looks different in a crisis, but I love that. So is your approach detailed in your book?
It is detailed in the book, but Chip, why don't you talk to Jamie about the forensic listening and what that's entailed and how you could immediately implement this? Like right after you get off this podcast, you should immediately implement this. It is life-changing for people.
Yeah. And so forensic listening is the analysis of a conversation after it's happened. So what you're doing is, because we know people in a long-term kind of way. It used to be that, we'd run into somebody, maybe it was a one-off kind of thing and done, never see that person again. Not in today's world, right? We're so interconnected. We're going to see that person again in some context. May not be professionally, may be personal, or it's another job, another project, another gig. So what we advocate is that you really become a student of human behavior, and specifically with the people that have influence in your world, that are important to you, your business, whatever it is. If you can go over those conversations, and we advise our people, whoever works with us, whether it's a team looking for leadership pointers or whatever it is that we have a 4-quadrant approach. We call it the 4D. And what we ask people is that as they take notes for next actions and what comes out and is important in a meeting, what the speaker is about, we also advise them to divide up a page into 4 sections. Make that mark in your page. And we're going to study 4 areas. One about is going to be theme development. So you have one section there, top right, is going to be theme development. And what we mean by that is that everyone, when they're speaking, has something they want to convey to you. There's an important point of it, right? Whether it's a meeting, it's a conference, whatever it is, someone speaking from the front, what they are going to repeat is going to be important. So you make note of that. The talk might be titled something else, and you know that, they talked about this 5 times. That's important.
An example of that, like in practical use, would be like if somebody says, I'm the most above board person you've ever met. I'm the most above board person you've ever met. I'm super honest, right? And they keep going back to this like one phrase. A lot of times you're like, why do they keep saying that? But again, that's a theme development, right? Like they want you to think that. Why do they want you to think that? Start to dig into that a little bit more. Just don't take what people say at the surface level. Think about like, why do they want me to think they're the most above board person in the world? Like, what is that about? Right. And just dig into that just a little more. So that's theme development. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other is going to be the emotion. So that could be your top left. Now, what emotion are they assigning to these themes? When they talk about a certain area, right? Are they getting excited? Like for you, I would imagine, Jamie, it's going to be for the Madison area kids, it's going to be, how yoga and the connectedness can, bring about change in behavior and align your teams and that kind of thing. Well, it's going to be the same kind of thing. You get excited by that. People are excited by the things they believe in and what they feel is their mission and purpose. So you are going to write that down. Okay, they talked about that theme and they aligned themselves emotionally with this. All right, that's important. And so the bottom left, if you have a line of sight on somebody, it's a conference, you're speaking one-on-one, you get to see how they are positioning themselves. And you've heard body language. Well, we differentiate a little bit. We call it body positioning. And what we mean by that is that we are all creatures of movement, right? So we are never static. We're always bouncing around. And our body positioning, how our gesticulations are going, what our head movement is doing, are we rocking? All these are indicators of something. And if you attach that to, again, the theme, the emotion that's being present, and now you're adding in body, you're going to start to see, all right, when they talked about this theme, they got very excited. They got very pumped up. And I could tell how they were facing front with me, right? And they were leaning in a little bit like, okay, right? Whereas if somebody's disinterested a little bit, you're going to start to see a little bit of blading, right? Which is turning away a little bit. Maybe there's a little bit more head movement. Again, looking at other things. They're not fully invested yet. Okay, so that's something important to notice. The last one, bottom right, is going to be what we call the voice, which is the pitch, tone, and cadence of their voice. And if you put all those together on the subject matter and understanding who they are and when the voice goes up, down, intonation increases, all that is going to give you clues and indications and things to work from. So that, and just like you said, Jamie, as you were responding to Adele, is that it is so meaningful. Imagine this. You're taking these notes. And you're like, okay, man, I really see the theme develop. I see where they got excited. I see where they lost energy. Okay, you go up to that person, let's say 2 weeks, a month later, and you say, Frank, that time when you talked about engagement and being fully engaged with somebody, I just want you to know it really resonated with me. And I decided as a result of that to implement 2 things that you mentioned that could really help. And I went on and did some further reading, and I found that this would also be helpful as well. And I've implemented that, and it's really made a difference. And I just wanted to say thank you. And the thing is, it's like, how often in our life does that happen, right?
Like on one hand, you can count how many people have been like, you changed my life.
Yeah.
And like, it's really hugely powerful.
Totally.
People love it when we remember those things about them. Like you were saying, Jamie, is that there's a factor now of known. And people want to know that you've connected with them, that you see something in them, perhaps that's even greater than what they see. And it can make all the difference.
Well, you are speaking right to my educator heart. I thought of a specific instance as you were just describing all of these different quadrants that I have been learning a lot about myself ever since I've been doing more public speaking and certainly recording podcasts about even just like where do I seem to light up and what are my tendencies. I recently gave a talk about what podcasting can do for your business because this is something that's newer to my business platform. I've been in business for a long time, but I've only recently started over the last year or so doing podcasts. And so it has completely transformed my business. And I was giving a talk about what podcasting can do for your business. One, when I watched the video back, I was like, oh man, you move your hands so much. It's funny. Like every picture, my arms were like all over the place. So I'm learning to hold them more still when I'm in these recording situations. But exactly what you're saying, as people have contacted me since the talk, which was back a couple months ago, and said like, oh, we started a podcast for our business because of this, or I heard what you said about this. And so we're doing that. Like, oh, that is just like, right. You're right. It is how you make people feel known and seen. And especially for educators, a lot of people in my line of work are looking to make an impact. Aren't we all? We're all looking to make an impact. And you guys are educators, you're writing books, you're leading classes. So yeah, that is like the highest form of flattery, is to take something that you shared and implement it. So that's really wonderful.
And kids are great negotiators, right? They are like fabulous negotiators. I have a son who's in third grade and he was having some behavior issues, right? And he'd come home and I'd be like, so what happened today? And he'd be like, well, I didn't have such a good day, but let's talk about what's going to happen tomorrow. Whoo, this kid's good. I mean, like he's got some real leadership skills that are showing it, like where he's a real good convincer. He's moving me off the topic.
I love it. Well, I have to tell you one little anecdote but that's a perfect segue to my next set of questions for you. But I have to tell you along those lines, my kids are all teenagers now. So I feel distanced enough from this story to tell you. But my youngest, who's now 13, when she was in first grade, so she was probably 6, I got a call from the school that she had pushed someone. And that was for me, I was like, oh my goodness. And she was adamant that she did not push him. She just moved him with her hands.
Oh, I like her. And
I was like, I said to her, I was like, that is the definition of pushing. I was like, if you moved someone with your foot, that would be kicking.
I like that. That's some good spinning right there.
It was some good spinning. It was some good PR of spinning. Yeah. It didn't work. She still had to face the music on that.
And most PR spinning doesn't work either, right? Like, I mean, that's what we always say, like, don't spin us. It doesn't work. It
does not work. Yes, totally. Well, I would love to talk about childhood for a second, because one of the things that you both talk about is how the skills that you gain in childhood about being convincing really can serve you today in your leadership or in your work. And so I want to first just start by asking, what were you each like as kids? Were you leaders? Were you negotiators as kids? What were each of you like as children?
Well, for me, I was the quiet kid. I was always watching and observing others, and I wasn't, at all kind of like putting my opinions forward as a young kid. Yeah, no, that wasn't me.
I was totally different. It's just like not going to surprise anybody about anything. I was the youngest of 3. I was the youngest by like a mile for all my cousins. Italian American, big family. And like, I was the entertainer, right? Like I'd get up, I'd dance, I was always like entertaining. But one of the things I think I felt like I learned from my childhood was just how to talk to anybody in any situation, because I did meet a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life. And like, I knew how to talk to the guy down the street or the executive, and, and I sort of talked to them the same way. So that was really good learning experience. And I think that made me a good communicator as I got older.
All right. Well, neither of those descriptions surprised me terribly. And it will not surprise you at all to know that I was more like Adele. I was very out there. And from a really young age, I was like leading things. Like I would organize out a Sunday brunch. I was the oldest cousin, actually. So on the flip side.
Oh, yeah.
And so I would organize like shows every Sunday and get all my cousins lined up in a row, and we would perform for the adults. Or I started a babysitters club when I was younger, and like organized babysitting jobs for all of my friends. And yeah, it just was the beginning of all of that. And I do feel like the skills that I had in childhood and developed in childhood have served me today. So I'm curious if you could share what you both think about how the convincing skills that kids can be so good at, or that kids practice, can serve us today.
Okay. Well, one of the things I would say is like, when we were researching the book, we were thinking like, where do your convincing skills come from? Like, how do you become a convincing person? Right. And so we saw this study that said that it was judgment and decision making among kids. And they said by about age 6, you already have a baseline for how you're going to be convincing. And most of us do not change or adapt those skills really into adulthood, because the person who got their way sulking on the playground sulks with their employees, right? The person who got away with guilting, as a child will guilt as an adult. And so we never really adapt or change our convincing skills. And if we do, we always make it the other person's fault, right? Like if we do and it fails, we're like, they just didn't like me, or they didn't get it, or it wasn't clear to them, but I'm right and they're wrong, right? We never really take responsibility for the fact that it's an exchange, and we may want to change our approach. And so that's why we kind of set out to write the book. It's like, if you read our book and you get 1 or 2 convincing strategies that you've never implemented before, even the idea of listening in a way that you haven't before, if you implement that one technique, you will be so much more convincing than before you picked up the book. Just that alone would work wonders for you. So kids are already pretty convincing. We are already pretty set in our ways, and we don't want to try new things because of fear of failure. But what we say is just try a couple little things that might work in your favor moving forward. And you could be so much more convincing.
Oh, I love that so much. I'm very excited to read your book. It's funny. I was thinking about how I was asking myself while you were talking, what was,
what's your style?
Not that this is about me, but like I was thinking, what was my style? And it's funny. I would write these like letters with my points. That was how I was convincing. I would detail out. I would write a letter to my parents saying why I should be allowed to do something. Or I remember in middle school, we wanted the principal to change something. And so what was my convincing style? I like talked to all my peers, and then I wrote a letter on our behalf and like explained it, whatever. I called myself like a fake lawyer. And it was so funny because just last week, one of my co-directors of one of my programs, I had to respond to something. And we both know that like when there's a long letter that needs to be written, it's going to be me that's writing it. And she said, I just feel so relieved when I see that you wrote the response, because I just know that every point is going to be detailed. So anyways, it's just funny. Like, yeah, I am still doing that in that way, but I'm really intrigued by this idea that there are other methods that will work different in other ways. And you're shining a light on a tendency of mine that I hadn't really thought about before. So I'm very intrigued to read the book. What would you each say was your convincing style when you were younger? And is that still the way that you move through the world now?
I would say that I have always been very determined, and I'm very persistent. And I believe that like persistence got me to where I am. And I think I was a persistent kid too, right? I'll give a funny story. When I was a kid, I love Elvis, and I know my dad loved Elvis, right? Like this is a silly thing, but it's an illustration of a point, right? And I still love Elvis. He's like one of my favorites. And so I really wanted to go to Graceland, and I knew that we had some summer vacation, and I'm like, Dad. And I worked on him for like 6 months. I was like, I really want to go to Graceland. Don't you want to go to Graceland? Wouldn't it be cool to go to Graceland? We could go to Graceland for the following reasons. It only takes it's this many miles away from where we live. Like, what do you think about taking we did. And we went to Graceland, 6 months later, because I asked, and I was super persistent. And that was like a really cool family trip. So I think persistence would be mine. Chip?
Well, I think what's interesting is that we often say each person likes to be treated as an individual, how they like to process information. So we say there's 2 types of people that, how they make decisions, and what is your convincing style? And this is something that Adele's really great at is, are you an emotional or are you fact-based convincer? Right? Now, that doesn't mean that you're 100% one or the other, right? There's blended, and that's the idea, but you're going to have leanings. So you know how you like to receive information, how you like to talk about things, and the ways that people or commerce interacts with you. You have a certain set that appeals more to you, whether that's the emotional or facts. So what we try to do, and I think that's one you're asking when I was younger. I think what I did is I just watched people and I figured out, what was it that got through to them? What was important to them as much as I could, I guess, at that time. And that's really what I still do. And I guess most agents and hostage negotiators are this way. We're going to sit back and we're going to listen. We're going to listen much more than we talk. And we're going to ask very, open-ended questions to people and find out about them. Because really that's what it's about. And that's something you can tell with somebody when they come on. I'm sure you know this, Jamie, whenever you're interacting with somebody, is that are they more interested in telling me about themselves? Is this like a cooperative kind of conversation? Or do they just want to find out about me? Where is that thing? And again, that's how individual styles kind of are all about. And if you can tap into that thing, you'll be ahead.
We didn't talk about this in the book, Jamie. We talked about the emotional based versus fact-based convincer. But one of the things that's kind of interesting about that is how you convince others. Like maybe you're a fact-based person, right? And so when you go into an argument, you might be fact-based, but when someone's trying to convince you, you get more convinced with emotion, right?
How interesting. Yes.
So it's like how you convince and how you want to be convinced. It could be the flip. So I don't know if you could tell us about you, but do you feel like you're more fact-based and then you want a fact-based argument? Or are you more fact-based, but you want an emotional argument when you're trying to be convinced?
Well, that's such an interesting question because, well, one, it touches on the love languages, which I know we already talked about, but it's sort of the same question. Like we can want to show and receive love, affection, care in different ways. And so I think you're really hitting on this on the head. I think I am more swayed by emotion than by fact. I think that's so interesting. One of my favorite nerdy topics is the Enneagram. And it's a personality study, right? Exploration. And so it's the one that I find to be most relevant to me. And I know that different people like different frameworks. And I think everybody just has to find the one that fits them. But for me, that's the one that I feel most seen by and helps me understand other people the most. So when I have a team, I always like to say, oh, do you know your Enneagram type? Obviously within each type, there's a lot of variance, but it just gets to what are people's core needs and core desires and core fears. And that's one of the reasons that I love the Enneagram. My Enneagram type is the helper, the nurturer, and so I always like to feel like I'm helping. I like to be helpful and feel helpful and useful. And so I think that when I do hear people's emotions, emotional needs, emotional desires, that is more convincing for me. I am more affected by that. I have my core desire is to be helpful.
But would you say you approach and convince people based on facts or?
Yes, I think so. It's just so interesting. I really wonder, this is turning into a whole thing about me, but I really wonder if it's partly because I feel like showing my emotional needs would infringe on them in a way. In order to be helpful, I don't want to expose my emotional needs to them because that would be unhelpful.
That's your unstated narrative.
That is my unstated narrative. This is so interesting. Well done. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I think we didn't talk about, what I think is a very relevant point in convincing, is this idea that you should never, when you're trying to convince anyone of anything, fact-based, emotional, however you approach it, you should never ever start with your strongest point first, which is so counterintuitive to what we all know, right? When you go into an argument or when you go into a meeting, you would love it if in 30 seconds you present your argument and everybody's like, wow, we really didn't need this meeting. You're so right. I have no other points to add to that. I wish this meeting would let's just end it. Only in our wildest dreams. That's how we picture the meeting going with our mom or our, or a significant other or whoever, right? Our best friend. But that's never the way the meeting goes, right? It's more about you starting with your point of agreement. Where do you all agree, right? That's pretty wildly known. But what's really important then is that you start to then present fear, uncertainty, and doubt to this person. It's like, maybe what you know about this topic we're talking about that I'm trying to convince you, maybe you don't know as much as you think. And maybe your fear is that you don't know everything, and you know you don't know everything. So I'm going to present you with that. And maybe you have a little bit of uncertainty around this and you're not sure about all of what you know. And maybe you have some doubts, and I'm going to present those things to you so that then you can go and convince yourself that what I'm presenting is new and different and you're open to it. But when you are trying to convince someone, it's about point of agreement, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So using FUD, we call it FUD, and then having the discipline to stop before you get them to their point of rejection. So before they reject what you're going to say, because sometimes if you start with your strongest point, what people are going to do, what are they going to do? If you start with your strongest point, they're going to just dig their heels in, right? You got nowhere to go. You have nowhere to go from that point. So give them room to go explore it. Hey, you might want to check out this article, or you might want to go to this website. It might make you think slightly differently. Just go check it out and come back and let me know what you learn. But convincing is a process, and it can't be done like that. It has to be a discipline. And that's why the forensic listening comes in, because imagine if you use these convincing strategies, you start at your point of agreement, you present FUD, you present FUD maybe around what they've said in previous conversations. Like, hey, I know that you said this, but did you know this is actually true? And you use all of these strategies in combination. I mean, you will be a powerhouse convincer.
Yeah, I love it. This is wonderful. You've given so many generous tips, and you have completely convinced me that you are the resource. I am fully subscribed to everything that you guys are doing. This is really wonderful, and your dynamic is so interesting between you two, and I see why it works so well. I just really appreciate you sharing your information so generously. I have a few questions that I'm really curious about, just about sort of in a different vein that I ask most of my guests, and it's about how you operate at such a high level. Are there skills or strategies that you use to stay organized? You know, you are writing books, you're doing masterclasses, you're consulting, you're each running your own companies, you're doing all of that. How do you each stay organized and effective in your daily lives? Is it like a tech tool or paper, or how do you operate so well?
ADHD? I don't know. Is that a fair answer? I have incredible hyper focus, and I've learned to use that and utilize that as a skill. It doesn't happen all the time, but I think one of the reasons why I've always been in some kind of high pressure job is because I work really well under stress. And like the more stress, the faster I work. But I think it's a superpower for me. Like I look at it and I go, I can work faster than most people. I can hyper focus when I want to. If I write down goals, I reach them. So I have that hyper focus, and that's a tremendous gift for me. I sort of wouldn't want to not have that. So, you know, I do use things like the Pomodoro technique. Love the Pomodoro technique. So like you're familiar with it, right? Like I think that is such an awesome tool. I mean, you know, I wrote one book before I wrote a book with Chip, and that's what I use. I use the Pomodoro technique the entire time. Like that's how I wrote the book after having a baby. I was pregnant. I went to a beach house and I wrote the book in 2 weeks. Wow. Yeah. My mom watched I had a little one. I was pregnant with the second one. And my mom watched my baby while I wrote the book in a beach house, just like pulled out 250 pages in 2 weeks.
All right. I love it. How about you, Chip?
I think for me, it's like in the FBI, it was about, casework. And so you always had a clock running. So you knew that you had certain elements that you had to get through, get done in order to present that, whether it was going to be prosecuted or not. So I like projects, and I like the deadlines that come with projects. And that's what Adele does, is that, she'll say, hey, during COVID, let's write a book. I'm like, okay, let's write a book. And that's what we did. And we had deadlines for, the number of pages that we would have to have submitted in, and, and people to be interviewed and all that. So we kind of backed into that. So I think, that along with writing down the goals of what do you want to accomplish is key for me, at least.
Well, it's no surprise that both of you work well in high pressure situations. So that's right in line with all of your work. That's great. And then the last question that I have for you is, if each of you had a day completely off, this is something I ask all my guests, a day completely off, you could accomplish nothing for work, no to-do lists at home, you just had a day completely off. What is one activity you would go and one place you'd go to get something to eat?
Ooh. To do, I would go shopping.
Okay. Okay.
I would go shopping. Definitely. That would be nice. And I think I would go to a really nice restaurant and have a meal, prepared and just sit and relax and read. Like, you could tell I'm a parent, right?
Yeah, totally,
totally. That's how you know. It's like, I want to escape.
Love it.
For me, I have a rescue dog, right? It's a pit. And so this dog is all consuming. So for me, I just, I like going on long walks. Twice a day, I take the dog for a long walk. Being outside, seeing nature is just so rejuvenating. So the more I can do that, the better off I am. So yeah, that's kind of my thing.
That's so much of a better answer than I'm like, retail therapy.
I don't think it's better. It's just different.
It's like, I want to buy new shoes. I want to
I love it. Well, that's great. I will be wishing that day for each of you very soon.
How about you, Jamie? What would you do?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't had that turned back on me. I don't hold still well either, but I would I live right by a nature conservancy. So mine would be similar to Chip's, that I would get out there and just walk with no goal, just go out there and listen to some music and just go. And then I don't know if this would actually come to be, but my wish list item would be taking my kids, who would all be in perfect moods for this for this dinner, and we would go out for like a long dinner somewhere in downtown Madison. Madison is a university town, and there's a central campus. I went there, so I live just about 15 minutes from there, and so it's so pretty. And so I would go for the nostalgic vibes and the beautiful area, and I'd take my kids.
One of the best summer days I've ever had was on a rooftop in Madison. It's so gorgeous. I'm like, what? I did not know this existed. Like, it's so beautiful. I ate cheese curds. I had wine on a roof, and there was a breeze. It was cool. I mean, like, summer day, amazing. Now, I would imagine that the winter, not so much fun, but summer, gorgeous. Yeah.
It's part of the process. It's part of the process.
Getting to that summer.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Well, yes. If you ever are back here, let's do that together. I'm in for that. So thank you both so much. I absolutely loved our conversation. I know our listeners are going to love hearing from you and learning all of your techniques and strategies. Where can people find you? We'll link everything in the show notes, but can you let listeners know where they can learn more about each of you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So they can go to trainingsogood.com and check it out. Sign up for one of our master classes, tell a friend, buy a book. We'd love you to buy a book. Yeah. And so thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Okay, great. Well, we will link that in the show notes. Thank you both so much for joining me. And to all the listeners, thank you for following along. We will be back next time with another inspiring interview. Follow the Leaders is produced by Lit Path Studios, and music is by Shane Ivers. You can hear more about this show and all the other podcasts at Lit Path Studios by going to www.litpathstudios.com.